All right, let's dive into a story from 1904 that is so bizarre, so unbelievable. It's honestly amazing it's not more famous. We're talking about an execution that, well, just wouldn't end.
Yeah, you heard that right. Let it sink in. We're not talking about some typical botched procedure where, a second jolt was needed. No. This is about a man who was officially pronounced dead. A whole team of doctors said so. They were unstrapping him from the chair, and he came back to life. And get this, it happened twice, in one night.
So the big question is, how? How is that even possible? How does a man survive the electric chair, get declared dead by doctors, and then just revive? Not once, but twice. It's wild. To even begin to wrap our heads around this, we need to go back and look at the man himself.
Okay, so let's talk about the man and the crime. Who exactly was Michael Schiller, and what did he do to end up in Ohio's electric chair in the first place?
So Michael G. Schiller, he was an Austro-Hungarian immigrant who'd actually done pretty well for himself, built a small fortune, but he had a really dark side. According to the historical records, it was fueled by alcohol, and it led to a long, terrible history of violence and abuse against his wife, Mary.
And the timeline of what happened next is just heartbreaking. Mary had finally divorced him, she'd escaped the abuse, and was trying to build a new life. She even sent a huge sum of money, we're talking over $100,000 in today's money, back to Hungary to get her kids set up. But Michael? He just wouldn't let her go. On June 1st, 1903, he shows up, demands she take him back, and when she refuses, he stabs her with a butcher knife, right there in her own yard in front of witnesses. It's horrific. And she didn't die right away. She clung to life for 5 awful days.
And even on death row, the kind of man he was really comes through. He's begging his own 12-year-old daughter, Minnie, go to the governor, save my life. But she was so utterly terrified of him that during their last visit, she literally refused to be left alone in the room with him. She was afraid he would kill her too. Just think about that.
All right, so that brings us to the night itself, June 17th, 1904. We're inside the Ohio State Penitentiary. The scene is set. The electrician has already tested the chair, everything is supposedly in perfect working order. Meanwhile, Schiller's in his cell, pacing, refusing any kind of comfort from a priest, just still hoping for some last-minute miracle.
And then, at 11:30 at night, the moment arrives. Guard John O'Brien, a guy who had seen more of these than probably anyone, walks up and says, "Well, Mike, it is time to prepare for this unpleasant ordeal." And the accounts say, that was it. That was the moment Schiller finally realized there was no getting out of this. So a little after midnight, 12:05 a.m., Schiller is strapped into the chair. The warden asks him if he has any last words. He says nothing, and they pull the lever.
Now you gotta understand, there was a very specific protocol for this. It wasn't just random. First, they hit him with 1750 volts for about 7 seconds. Then, they drop it down to 250 volts for the rest of the minute. After that, they shut off the power, and a whole team of doctors, 6 of them, comes in to examine the body and officially confirm death. This was the playbook, and it had worked perfectly for the 12 executions before this one.
And that is exactly what they did. The 6 physicians came in, they checked his heart, his pulse, his eyes, everything, and every single one of them pronounced him dead. So, as far as everyone was concerned, the execution was over. Done. The witnesses all got up and filed out of the room. So now it's just the guards left in the room, right? Their job is to unstrap the body and get it ready for the undertaker. So they start loosening the clamps.
And then the impossible happens. The captain of the guards, a guy named Humphrey Fogel, he actually wrote about this later. He described a stifled sigh and a gurgling sound. The man who was just declared dead by 6 different doctors was breathing.
You can just imagine the chaos, absolute panic. Schiller is alive, and the official death warrant says he has to be executed until dead. But here's the problem. The generator, way over in the powerhouse, was already shut down. It took them 2 frantic minutes to get everyone back in the room, get Schiller re-strapped, and get the power back on. And the whole time, Schiller is audibly groaning and breathing in the chair. Just unbelievable.
Okay, so they hit him with the electricity again, this time for even longer. And after this second go-around, you better believe they were not taking any chances. The doctors did a full 12-minute examination. They were absolutely sure this time. The official report said he was dead beyond the shadow of a doubt. So for the second time, the witnesses leave. The guards unstrap the body, they lay it out on the floor, and they cover it with a sheet for the undertaker. And just as they're turning to leave the room, they hear it again. a long, painful groan from under the sheet. He was still alive.
I mean, let's just break this down because it's insane. Attempt number 1, they follow the protocol, he's declared dead, he revives. Attempt number 2, they give him a longer shock, they do a super thorough exam, declare him dead, and he revives again. So for the third attempt, with no witnesses left, they just cranked the voltage so high that it literally burned him to a crisp. And this time, well, this time he stayed dead.
So in the aftermath, you can imagine the newspapers went crazy. Total uproar. How could something so horrific happen? The big question on everyone's mind was simply, what on earth went wrong?
The public was obviously outraged, but then they did this big official investigation. They brought in expert electricians from all over the country to check everything out, and their conclusion was baffling. They said the chair, the generator, the whole setup was in first-class order. It was all working perfectly. So, the prison officials, they were completely cleared of any wrongdoing.
So if the equipment was fine, what gives? A few theories started floating around. The most scientific one, and maybe the most plausible, was that Schiller had basically stopped drinking water for days, which would have increased his body's resistance to electricity. Then you had the superstition angle. You know, people in the prison saying he was the unlucky 13th man to be executed in that chair. But really, the unspoken truth here seems to be that the entire process, regardless of the equipment, was just a catastrophic failure.
And get this wasn't some weird one-off fluke. The very next night, they executed another man, Moses Johnson, in the exact same chair. And it took them 5 attempts to kill him. So 2 horribly botched executions back to back, that starts to make you think the problem wasn't with Schiller, but with the system.
And that brings us to maybe the biggest mystery of this whole thing. A story this wild, this gruesome. How come we've all forgotten about it? Why isn't this a famous case?
It's really strange. If you go look up botched executions online, you're not going to find Michael Schiller's name. It's not on the top 10 lists, it's not on Wikipedia, it's not even in the major death penalty archives. The story of the man who died 3 times has been almost totally erased from history. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? We've just spent all this time completely fascinated by the gruesome, unbelievable spectacle of this killer's execution. But in all of that, the story of his victim, Mary Schiller, this woman who was just trying to escape abuse and build a better life for her kids, she gets completely lost. So what does it say about us, about the stories we choose to tell and remember, when the monster's unbelievable death completely overshadows the life he so brutally took?